Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hey everyone, this is Britt Lightning from Vixen.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
And you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll.
We are here with Brian from the My Weekly Mixtape podcast, and we are here to talk about Bob Seger, one of my absolute favorite artists. I know you're a big fan of him as well. So first, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Oh, absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been listening to your show for a while, so it's really cool that we're able to connect now and a great topic for it. Bob Seger is one of my all-time favorites, so very cool to do a little deep dive on his music today. But tell us a little bit about your fandom of Bob, kind of an overall view. How did you discover his music, and how present is it in your rotation today?
Bob Seger is one of the great songwriters of my childhood, my favorite artist of all time, just for full disclosure. Anyone that listens to My Weekly Mixtape already knows this, but it's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Traveling Wilburys, Mudcrutch, that whole 9 yards. However, there were other artists that I think fell into that same vein, and that was Billy Joel, John Hyatt, and Bob Seger. And yes, they all have different musical sounds, but there's something about the songwriting that each of those bring to the table that really resonate with me as a musician and as a fan of music.
Oh, very cool. Oh, interesting to hear you're a John Hyatt fan. Our friend Jesse does the Perfectly Good podcast. Have you been on that show?
I haven't yet, but I've already raised my hand because my wife and I went to go see a movie back in 2003 when we were dating. And it was that we went to this like dine-in theater, and long story short, the only movie they had showing at the time was The Country Bears. So we said, oh, what the hell? Let's go have dinner and watch this movie. And throughout the whole movie, I'm going, this soundtrack's awesome. This guy sounds just like John Hyatt. He's doing a deadpan John Hyatt impression as the lead singer of the Country Bears. And sure enough, when the movie was done, I'm like, the music in that was incredible. We need to go buy the soundtrack. Picked up the soundtrack, spun it around. John Hyatt. I'm like, there it is. And I have already raised my hand on Perfectly Good podcast to try to get in for a little Straight in the Heart of Love.
Oh, very good. Yeah. I mean, that's a long ways out. Hopefully they get you on before that, because I know they're doing it alphabetically. But
I know it's got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the great things about being on the Pantheon Network. You know, us podcasters, we meet each other and go on each other's shows. So let's talk about your show for a second. My Weekly Mixtape. How did that show get started, and how long have you been doing it now?
Well, officially, the show's been going on now. It'll be hitting 100 episodes in a couple weeks here. It started in January of 2023, but the name actually comes from, I'd say I was 7 or 8 years old. When I was growing up, if I did all my chores and I got everything taken care of, when my mom went food shopping, she would let me pick out a 2-pack of cassettes. And on special occasions, my father would bring me to Costco or BJ's and let me get that Maxell XL2 90s in a brick of like, it was either 5 or 10, depending on which brick you got. And what I would do is each week I would have my buddies over and we'd all bring our different cassettes and records, and we would collaborate making mixtapes together. And then we would run off copies for all of us. And I said to myself, when I was trying to come up with an idea for this show, I'm like, how can I turn what I did as a kid into a podcast? So My Weekly Mixtape was born because each week I would make mixtapes with my buddies. I said, why not just do that now? And the whole show is centered around bringing a guest on, picking a topic or an artist or a random. We have an episode called Short Songs. And you could take that however you'd like. It could be a 1-second song. It could be transatlantic 75 minutes. If you think that's a short song, it's all up for interpretation. It's all up for discussion. And we build a 20-song mixtape spontaneously and on the fly, trying to come up with songs that would work well based on the topic as we bounce them off each other. It makes for a fun conversation. And I've been blessed enough to have some of the artists that I'm a huge fan of come on and quote unquote play the game, which was like the Spin Doctors. I've had Liberty DeVito from Billy Joel's band come on. Scott Kloppenstein from Real Big Fish came on to do a ska punk playlist. So to be able to talk with the people that made the music on top of doing the curation, it's like this double layered podcast that's just, I've been just having so much fun doing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. It's a great concept for a show, and it's so cool to hear that comes from like something you used to do as a kid. I mean, like that's the dream. So I got to ask, in the time you've been doing this show, has Bob Seger been a recurring character? Have people brought up his songs? Have you brought up his songs for various topics?
His music has shown up, but we have not done a full episode yet. So that is still to come.
All right. Well, let's dive into one of the albums that we're going to be talking about today. So beforehand, I reached out to you and I asked basically for two of your favorite Bob Seger albums. It didn't have to be number one, but it had to be one that you had strong feelings about, one that you're a big fan of. And one of the ones you sent me was Stranger in Town from 1978. One a stone cold classic album. Packed with hits. It opens with Hollywood Nights, Still the Same, and Old Time Rock and Roll. Maybe his strongest opening for an album, of his whole catalog. So tell me about your appreciation for this record. Why was this your first pick?
This was my first pick because this was the Bob Seger album when I was growing up. I vividly remember every Friday night during the week, my parents would come home, we'd have dinner, and they would do the Jeopardy Wheel of Fortune routine, 7:30, and then I'd go to bed. But on Friday nights, instead of putting on Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, my father would turn the TV off after the news and he would pull out the vinyl collection. And Friday nights was one of my favorite things in the world. Tom Petty, The Cars, Huey Lewis in the News, Pat Benatar, Bob Seger. And when he pulled out Bob Seger, it was always Stranger in Town. And this has my all-time favorite Bob Seger song on it. I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point, but we'll see. I'm going to put a pin in that for now.
Okay.
And I mean, come on, the classics, Hollywood Nights, Old Time Rock and Roll. And then there's songs. I mean, you've got Muscle Shoals,
yep,
and the Silver Bullet Band kind of doing halftime on the album, splitting the songs up, which brings two different dynamics. I mean, as a kid, I couldn't tell the difference, but as an adult, you could tell those Muscle Soul. I always screw that up. All the years of broadcasting,
yeah,
you found one of my Achilles heels. Muscle Shoals. Those songs really have a different feel, but the way he was able to sequence these tracks, it actually makes sense and works.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's almost like this is like a classic rock Avengers movie where you have some of the great players of two like titans of that era, the Silver Bullet Band and Muscle Shoals. So let's talk about some of the highlights. Let's start with the obvious one, Old Time Rock and Roll. Absolute radio staple. Definitely a popular one at weddings. That seems to be one, at least in my experience. That's one of the few that will get the older folks out on the floor from time to time. Let's start with this as a topic. Is that song overexposed?
I'm going to go with a controversial answer to that and say no.
Good. Okay.
And here's my reason. One, as a factual answer, It's the lowest charting single he had on the album. It only reached number 28. I mean, it was a top 40 hit, but considering the other singles he released, this was the worst performing song. The reason this song is as popular as it is because of Risky Business. And when that movie came out, the song hit the charts again, went back up to number 48, didn't crack the top 40. But I mean, 5 years later to have that resurgence.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest, when Risky Business came out, I was 5. Alf is what introduced me.
Oh, okay.
I knew the song from listening to the album with my parents growing up. But when Alf recreated the scene in the TV show, I'm like, Dad, what's this? Makes no sense. He goes, give it a few years and I'll show you the original movie. But for now, it's a spoof on an old movie that used old time rock and roll. So I knew the reference at 7, 8, 9 years old, but it wasn't until I got a little older and I saw Risky Business that I understood. But that, to me, if that's the reason the song is infamous, kind of like Moving in Stereo from Fast Times at Ridgemount High. I mean, a lot of these songs get put into movies. I mean, think about Guardians of the Galaxy now. You take these songs, and once they become synonymous with a movie, I feel like it's an unfair thing to do to a song, because the song in and of itself is amazing. But because of the popular culture aspect of it, people tend to say, oh, it's overplayed, it's overused. And I'll disagree. Although, yeah, sometimes at a wedding, it's like, oh, you know that, oh, there's not enough people dancing. They know it's an easy go-to.
Yeah.
And it works. And you know what? I've never once said, when they play it at a wedding. I love the song. I'm not going to, who cares if it's a popular song? Because when it first came out, it didn't move the needle as much as Hollywood Nights, or Still the Same, or even We Got Tonight.
Yeah, that's a good point. I tend to agree with you because, you know, I like the song because I try to place it in the context of the time. You know, he put that out right when you had the Stones and Rod Stewart doing disco. And I think he kind of took the flag for rock music and basically just said, no, I'm not going there, you know, and there's a lot of us that aren't going there. So that's what I think of when I hear this song. And I also think, and I'm sure you agree with me, that like for music fans, the idea of listening to an old song with fresh ears, like you got to be able to do that. You know, the song I always think of that kind of suffers from this kind of thing is like Born to Be Wild. Because how many commercials have you seen that in? If you can kind of let that fall away, you know, and just listen to the song, that's a great song, you know, and it's just been grabbed and kind of been eaten up by, well, commercials and movies and soundtracks and that kind of thing. So, no, I like that answer. I tend to agree. So, tell me what do you feel are? Let's go straight to your favorite. What's your favorite song in the album, and what are some of the other highlights for you?
Well, my favorite song on the album and my favorite Bob Seger song of all time is actually Still the Same.
Wow.
Reached number 4 on the Billboard US Hot 100. It's the highest charting song on the album. So it is the album's biggest hit. But for some reason, every time people look at the album cover, they automatically go to Old Time Rock and Roll. But at the end of the day, Old Time Rock and Roll was the worst, quote unquote, charting hit. And I mean, we're talking semantics here, 24 spots on the Billboard Hot 100. There are people that would kill to have 2 top 40 hits on one album. He had 4 on this one. So, I mean, the album does all of that, but Still the Same. I always loved the storytelling aspect of the song. I loved the fact that it was about poker.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy that aspect of it as a kid. I didn't understand, but I knew the songs like The Gambler, and I felt like this kind of fell in the same vein. Hell, when my band plays, we do a mashup. We do Still the Same into The Gambler.
That's awesome.
they work so well because we can end Still the Same on a G, and then go right into The Gambler, and it works so well. And people are like, "Oh, is this the poker section of your set?" And I said, well, you know, we haven't added Poker Face yet, but we'll get there. There's something about this song. And when I was in my 20s, my uncle and I, before he passed away, I was working overnights in radio. And when I would get done, he'd say, "Hey, I'm going to the casino. Why don't you come meet me for lunch? We'll play a couple rounds of poker. And, you call it a day. You get home so you can get to bed by 5 o'clock."
Yeah.
And we did it about once a month for the 2 years I worked at this show. And sadly, towards the end of the show's run, he passed away. So now when I listen to the song, there's a little bit of a bittersweet nature because I think about sitting there and playing poker with him.
Yeah.
And I'll sidebar one short story because it's funny and it'll kind of explain the bittersweet nature of the song for me. We went and played on a 1-3 table. Now, for people that don't know poker, a 1-3 table means the minimum bet is $1 and the maximum bet is $3. So I cash in $100 and I got all my chips in front of me and they deal the cards and I look at my 2 cards and I got a pair of aces. And then they start putting the cards up and there's an ace so I've already got 3 of a kind. So the first 2 people bet and it comes to me and I take all $100 worth of chips and slide them into the center of the table. And everybody at the table just got their eyes wide open and looked at me angrily like, "The hell is this guy doing? Come on." And they all got mad. And my uncle stood up and he goes, guys, this is my nephew. His first time playing. Brian, the most you could bet is $3 anytime it goes around. And I go, "Oh." And I slide all the chips back and I throw 3 chips in the center. Fold, 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 fold.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm so glad you said that because I thought I was going to be a little controversial by saying that's easily my favorite song of the album too, and it's probably a top 3 Seger song for me too. And I don't have the same sort of childhood affectionate kind of memory with it. I just like it. So we are simpatico on that.
All right.
Definitely one of the strong songs. And I think, and it's impressive because it's up against old time rock and roll and also Hollywood Nights. Hollywood Nights is, when I talk to people about Bob Seger, that's usually one that always comes up as a favorite. Let's turn to We've Got Tonight. Is that Bob's best ballad?
It depends on what your definition of a ballad is. And I know we're talking about a second album tonight, so I'll have a song that I would say for me at least, and that's the beauty of music. All of this is subjective.
Yep.
There are no right and wrong answers. We've Got Tonight's amazing.
Yeah.
And the fact that Kenny Rogers and Sheena Easton's version actually charted higher than Bob Seger's version, I always thought was odd because Kenny Rogers hit number 6 and Bob Seger's only hit number 13. Again, we're only talking they're both top 20 hits.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is there wasn't a huge time lapse between those hits. This wasn't a Moni Moni situation for Billy Idol where he's doing it 20, 30 years after the original. This is 5-6 years later. And the song is becoming a bigger hit than the first time around. That just shows that the power of Bob Seger's songwriting.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I will say that, in the album we talk about next, the country guys sure liked Bob's music.
Yeah.
But let's give some credit to some of the songs on the album that weren't necessarily the big hits or the radio staples. What do you consider, is there a highlight track that isn't necessarily a song that everybody knows?
Oh God, it's tough. I'd say if I had to pull one out of the ethos from the album, it'd probably be Till It Shines.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Glenn Frey's guitar solo, the harmonizing close at the end there. And then there's that, maybe it's because still the same as my favorite Bob Seger song. There's the walk down in the bridge of Till It Shines. That's very similar in nature. The boom, 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 boom. And it kind of walks down just like Still the Same. And it gives me that almost a callback 2 songs later on the album. And there was something about it that always stuck out to me as wow, Still the Same was such a massive hit. This one had Glenn Frey on guitar. How did this not get even considered? That's how good of an album this is.
The last one I want to give a shout out is one I almost said earlier was Feels Like a Number. That song to me, you mentioned Bruce Springsteen a little bit ago, and I love Springsteen, and Springsteen has this reputation of being like the working man's songwriter. And I feel like a song like Feels Like a Number from Bob puts him like right there in that same class because that's all I could think of was just like this is a great song about the monotony of just being a working man and and how unappreciated that is.
This one, again, it's the B-side to Still
Yeah.
the Same. So there was no chance of this becoming a single. And that sucks because this is such a great song. Doug Riley, Dr. Music, for those people in Canada that know Dr. Music, that piano solo in the song. I mean, my God, Bob Seger is good. Doug Riley, that is like, he's on another level. And I'm not putting Bob's piano playing down in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
But there's something about this song that, and I know I'm going to probably catch some groans, but I'm specifically talking from a musical standpoint here. A fellow Detroit musician, Kid Rock, always brings up Bob Seger in his music, and he has flat out openly said how Bob Seger inspires him. And if you listen to Feels Like a Number and you listen to some of the later Kid Rock songs and you wonder where he's getting inspiration from, it's so obvious. The gravel that Kid Rock tries to use, he's trying to channel Bob Seger. And from a musical only perspective, it's hard not to respect that because you're not like you're looking up to one of the best singer-songwriters of a generation. And one of the more memorable ones to come out of a insanely popular Detroit music scene. Like you're cutting through, think of all the artists coming out of Detroit to cut through that noise in the 70s with rock music that was going to make a statement. He had to cut through a lot to make waves. And the fact that he did it just shows how big he is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was in Detroit earlier this year, and there was an exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum that I went to that had its own Bob Seger section, but it had photos and memorabilia from all different kinds of Detroit artists. And it's just amazing, that class of artists. And it is a huge compliment that Bob is, even in that elite tier group, in the elite tier of that group.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, you're cutting through. You're talking about at the time you had Motown, Hitsville, USA, and he's coming from a completely different genre and making waves, but he's incorporating just enough of that R&B sound. Which, yes, I'm not saying that Bob Seger's R&B, but if you listen to some of the songs, there's definitely a tip of the hat here and there, and you could catch the nuances. You could catch the influences. And I don't know, to be able to cut through all that at the time. That's like when in the 90s, when Seattle became the scene, and it seemed like every band on the radio was out of Seattle. The ones that rose to the top are the ones that people still talk about to this day. It's Pearl Jam, it's Alice in Chains, it's Stone Temple Pilots, it's Soundgarden.
Yeah.
But there was so much more at the time.
Yeah. Oh, it's
And Nirvana. I should say Nirvana.
Well,
too.
of course, yeah.
Yeah. People are yelling like, dude didn't say Nirvana. What the hell? Nirvana.
I mean, honestly, that's great for engagement. So next time, don't. All right,
but they're going to be coming after my head, man. I can't do
that. That's true. All right. Any final thoughts on Stranger in Town?
To me, Stranger in Town is a very special album because you start the opening to Hollywood Nights, And it's Friday night with me growing up with my parents. I was an only child. This was Friday night music night.
Yeah.
And there's something about this album that is always going to hit me in the nostalgic feels, even though the songs like Old Time Rock and Roll hit everybody in the nostalgic feels. This one's a little different because it was like one of those Friday night spins, as I would call it, with my parents.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay. Well, we're going to move forward to the second album that you picked, which was released just 2 years after this one, Against the Wind. So my first question, is this another one of those Friday night albums for you? It's a little later, but is that part of that those memories?
It was, but as not the same effect. Because if you think about this, I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and my parents were not going to play the horizontal block for me yet.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I got in trouble in kindergarten for we used to have show and tell. Now they call it show and share with the kids. But when I was a kid, it was called show and tell. And I got in trouble in kindergarten because I brought in AC/DC's If You Want Blood, You've Got It from Highway to Hell. And my teacher called my mom and said, do you understand what your child is listening to? My mom goes, yeah, it's AC/DC. What's wrong with that? It's a great song. He knows that there's no blood in the sky or blood in the street. He knows it's just a imaginative lyrics. But apparently the rest of the kindergarten class didn't.
Oh man. Do you think that was like the satanic panic? Your teacher thought they were devil worshippers or whatever?
Maybe, but no, just my parents loved rock music. I grew up on a heavy dose of pretty much anything and everything. So, but they were, they didn't let me listen to horizontal bop. So this one didn't get as much spin. But as I got older, I gave this album a lot of spins because, again, I feel like I don't want to say a continuation of Stranger in Town because in a way it is, because you've got that Muscle Shoals. There I go again.
Yeah.
Silver Bullet Band balance that he pulls off once again. So in vein, it's a similar album, but he's taking some more risks on this album and trying some different things and exploring a little bit of that country or even folk side of rock and roll. And to some, it came with critical acclaim, and to others, they kind of look down their nose at this album. And I think it's a little unfairly maligned for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I didn't dislike really anything I heard on the record. In fact, it features some of my favorites and some more big hits. On this, we have You'll Accompany Me, the title track, and one of my all-time favorites, Her Strut, which, come to think of it, another one probably not appropriate, for young kids. So, let's start with Her Strut. That's got to be one of his hardest rocking songs. Do you think that's about as well? With the exception of maybe Heavy Music, is that the hardest Bob has ever rocked?
I would say tied with Siesta La Vie from the Greatest Hits album.
Okay.
That's got a little bit of that heavy, but Her Strut's right up there. Like, don't get me wrong. And this was the B-side to Horizontal Bop. Kind of shocked when I got the Greatest Hits album in 94 because I got the CD. I'm like, oh my God, they have a Bob Seger Greatest Hits. I was in college at that point. And I'm like, I get to listen to some Bob Seger and show my friends what I listened to growing up. Her Strut wasn't on there. Bummer. But he made up for it because he put it on Greatest Hits 2 a decade later, or 2003. And then on 2011, the Ultimate Hits 2 CD set, it made it there as well. So obviously he acknowledges the importance of the song. But in my humble opinion, it should have been on the first Greatest Hits. It's that good of a song. Kind of the way Stone in Love was left off the original Journey Greatest Hits. Yeah. Journey's Greatest Hits would be a perfect album if Stone in Love was on it, but that's a different conversation.
Oh God, that's very interesting. Yeah, and back in those days, track selection for Greatest Hits really meant something. So it is. I agree with you though. I think that should have been on that first volume. So let's talk about the big recognizable hits first. The three I mentioned. Uh, what's your favorite of that batch?
You're talking about the four singles from the
Yes.
album? I'm going to go with my favorite song on the album, and also a top 3 Bob Seger song for me of all time is You'll Accompany Me.
Yeah.
I mean, again, Tom Petty is my favorite artist. John Hyatt is up there. You listen to a song like You'll Accompany Me, how can you not love this song? The guitar, this is the ballad that I actually said, is this a ballad? When we were
Oh,
talking about, is it a ballad? It's kind of mid-tempo, but there's a little bit of it that you could, if you wanted to, just sit there with an acoustic guitar and you could slow it down more. Country artists have pulled and covered this one. There's a guy, Frankie Ballard, a few years ago who covered this song. I think that's his name. If I messed that up, I apologize. But this song hit number 14 on the Billboard US Hot 100. And I feel that's criminally low.
yeah.
Yes, again, we're only talking 13 more spots to be a number 1 hit, but You'll Accompany Me. There's just something about the song that's so, I'll use the word freeing.
Yeah.
Picture a convertible driving down the road on a Sunday afternoon with that song playing. There's a peace in this song. There's a beauty in this song. There's a comfort in this song. And I don't know. The fact that Horizontal Bop and Her Strut kind of sandwich it is
Yeah.
to me is a little odd coming from a
Yeah.
sequencing perspective. Had they gone Horizontal Bop, Her Strut in the number 2 spot, and then take it down on track 3 for You'll Accompany Me, I think it would have been just as strong as the 3 opening tracks on Stranger in Town. But I think as an album, it was a little weird to go from the Horizontal Bop down to You Accompany Me up into Her Strut. It kind of felt a little, as much as I love all 3 songs, just sequenced a little odd for my humble opinion.
That's great. I agree with you, and that's the fun thing about talking about records is that like you get to consider things like sequencing decisions, and yeah, the flow of an album is really important. And yeah, it's a little, now that you bring it up, it's a little herky jerky. The use of the apostrophe in "accompany" has always been something I've loved about that song, if only because I really can't think of seeing anything like that in song titles or music at all, except like going back to when I was a kid and like singing like church choir songs when I was in grade school. Like you don't see the use of the apostrophe and in the words like that too often.
It's almost phonetic in a way.
Yeah.
Like Sly and the Family Stone, Let Me Be Myself Again,
Yeah.
only with the apostrophe in this instance.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, absolutely. Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff is fun. I like when that works its way into the title. Okay, so let's talk about the title track. Wish I Didn't Know Now What I Didn't Know Then, to me, is an all-time great lyric. That's maybe my favorite Seeger lyric. What are your thoughts on the title track?
The title track is just a friggin' masterpiece. I mean, come on. When you talk about Bob Seger, everybody goes to old time rock and roll. And again, we already waxed poetic about our love for that song. So
Absolutely.
this is zero disrespect to that. But this is the side of Bob Seger that really resonates with me. The Still the Sames, the You'll Accompany Me, the Against the Wind. These songs are a vibe.
Yeah.
I mean, really. And the only reason I say that, at least for Against the Wind, in 1985, 5 years later, the Highwaymen, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson, 4 of the greatest country artists, arguably 4 of the greatest country artists of
One of
all
the greatest
time,
artists. I
or
mean,
artists, any genre,
yeah.
come together and do this super group, which probably one of the more important supergroups, I'd say, along with the Traveling Wilburys, at least from my musical standpoint.
Yep.
And they cover the song. Talk about a hat tip. Talk about, I mean, for the rest of Bob Seger's life, he gets to walk around and say, these four legends liked my song so much that they decided together that, I mean, what more needs to be said about how amazing this song is? Brooks and Dunn have covered it. And then when Ronnie Dunn did a solo out, he covered it. Paul Anka covered this song. The Hold Steady covered this song. None of them, as much as I love all the covers because I love the original. Yes, even the combined Avengers superpowers of Cash, Jennings, Nelson, and Christopherson don't top the original for me. That's how much I love the original.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I love the Highwaymen version too. It's very hard to beat a song when Johnny Cash is singing, but I think I'd give the edge to the original too. And going back, I agree with you what you said about a vibe. That class of Seeger songs, it's all very comforting. Like there's a very comforting aspect to listening to those, not the hardest rock edge of his catalog. You know, it's the kind of thing you could listen to while sitting by a fireplace or out by the lake, you know. So okay, we've covered pretty much all of the big hits on the record. Let's go a little deeper. What are some of your favorites of the songs that aren't necessarily going to be on any greatest hits compilations?
I have to say No Man's Land because, again, it resonates with me musically on that same line as You'll Accompany Me, Still the Same, Against the Wind. But the other one I would bring up might actually make some people snicker or whatever, but Betty Lou's Getting Out Tonight. I mean, I grew up in the 80s as a child, and another one of the Friday night albums was the Eddie and the Cruiser soundtrack from John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band. And as a kid, I knew on that album there was a cover of Bobby Freeman's Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes. And then as I got older and Against the Wind started playing, it's Betty Lou's Getting Out Tonight. And then my dad got that, oh my God, what was the name of the Neil Young album where he does the rockabilly?
Oh, Everybody's Rocking.
Everybody's Rocking. He does Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes on that as well. And I'm like, who the hell is Betty Lou? Like all these upbeat songs about Betty Lou. So it always made me question, was there a Betty Lou that all these songs, I know I only picked two, but run with it here.
No, I'm with you.
And they're very similar in nature. So part of me wonders, is Betty Lou's Getting Out Tonight, if I ever interviewed Bob Seger, I would ask him if this was a quote unquote sequel to Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes, followed up by Betty Lou's Getting Out Tonight.
That's terrific. I like that a lot. Yeah. No, that's a great connection. And who knows? Yeah, maybe there might have been, you know, some woman named Betty Lou who is just so legendary that she inspired both somehow. Very good. Well, okay, I got to give one a shout out here. Is Fire Lake, and I know that's another one that's a kind of a fan favorite. I mean, I got to give it a shout out because it mentions a guy named Joe, which I'm all about. But more to the point, going back to what you brought up about some earlier songs, you got like all of the Eagles on backing vocals here, and very strong backing vocals, particularly near the end of this song. You know, we're talking about the Silver Bullet Band, Muscle Shoals, and then he's bringing in his celebrity fans who are one of the great vocal groups of that era. You know, this is, I think it's great you picked these two albums because this is from that era when Bob was firing on all cylinders. He had a killer run from, I would say, Live Bullet all the way through an underrated album, but one that was brought up recently on this show, The Distance.
Oh, yeah. It's a great album.
Any final thoughts on Against the Wind as a whole?
To me, they're perfect back-to-back, Stranger in Town and Against the Wind. And then you throw Night Moves into the fold. I mean, that is a 3-album run that, to me, my people ask like, what's your favorite 3 album run? And I sometimes go with the Stones because there's the era of the Stones in the 70s where you had Let It Bleed through Exile on Main Street. It's like, oh God, that's like probably it for me. That's such a good run.
Yeah.
But Against the Wind, Stranger in Town, oh, and I'm sorry, I totally messed the order of those up, but you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah,
Damn.
100%. You know what's funny? Years ago, I had another guy on the podcast where we asked each other our favorite Rolling Stones albums, and before he answered, he was just like, "Well, it has to be one of those four, right? Like you're not even allowed to have a favorite Stones album outside of what is that? The from 68 to 72. It's got to be one of the four." Same question to you. What's your favorite Stones album?
I mean, it's you got to pick from those four, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Beggar's Banquet myself. I think that's a great one, but I also love, I mean, Sticky Fingers is great. So this is where you talk around it. You go, well, and then so-and-so, then Exile on Main Street's pretty good too.
Two great albums. I'm so glad you picked them. It's been so much fun listening to these records and really diving deep on them. So I appreciate the selections. But since you're a Seger fan, we got a couple of minutes left. I've got some just random Seger topics for you that you can opine on however you want. So we just talked about this Killer 3 album run, but really it's part of a bigger stretch when he was at his critical and commercial height.
Yep.
Let's go a little deeper. Let's go to some stuff that isn't, again, necessarily everybody's first thought when it comes to Bob. If someone told you they're a Bob Seger fan, but they only know the greatest hits, what would be an album or a song or a couple of songs that you might put together on a playlist, that you would point fans to? What's a good kind of deeper level of Bob's catalog?
For me, I might go all the way back and go Smoking OPs as an album. I mean, that is really, really, really solid. I didn't even know that album existed until I was in a pawn shop in like the early 2000s and I saw it on CD and I'm going, is this like some kind of, I didn't realize like there was Bob Seger music. Again, early 2000s, there was a little bit of internet, a little bit of Google, but
yeah,
you mostly relied on what you knew and what your buddies knew for music. And I honestly thought that Bob Seger started at Night Moves.
Yeah.
I mean, and at the time I'm 19, 20 years old. It's very reasonable to not know about the stuff he did prior to the Silver Bullet Band, the stuff with the Bob Seger system, Ramblin' Gamblin' Man, Mongrel. But to me, Smokin' OPs is bringing you towards where you would get with Night Moves, but it's not quite there yet. It's a little bit in the Bob Seger system sound and a little bit into the Silver Bullet Band sound, but it's right in the middle. So that's where I would send people if they wanted something outside of the greatest hits.
That's a good one because that's from that era that you said you didn't, when you first discovered it, you didn't even know it existed. It kind of doesn't, because he like buried it. That whole era of pre-Night Moves, that whole catalog, a couple of those never really made the jump to CD properly, and the ones that did weren't exactly widespread and nothing that really got to the radio, but there's some real gems in there. I recently listened to one of the last albums from that stretch. It's called Seven. And
oh yeah, the one before Beautiful Loser.
Yeah, it got I think Upper Middle Class is on there. That is a great song. They've got he had some good songs. I mean, granted, there's some junk in that era, but I would say there's enough gems to make it worthwhile for the stuff to be a little more out there. You mentioned earlier Tom Petty's your all-time favorite artist. He's up there for me too. I only got a chance to see Tom play once. And seeing him play once made me regret every other time I skipped him because he played. I'm from Milwaukee, and he played Milwaukee so many times. I had so many chances, and when I finally did go, I left thinking, how did I skip him that many times? So I'm right there with you. Uh, do you think Bob measures up to the Springsteens, the Pettys? Is he, as far as a songwriter goes, is he in that like elite tier songwriter as far as your appreciation goes?
Oh, of course. I mean, there's not even a thought as to him not being there. I think the only difference is there was an era where even though he was still out doing the touring and stuff, the albums kind of dried up after the greatest hits.
Yeah.
There was that stretch between, God, I want to say it was It's a Mystery in 1995. And what was the first album after that? Was it Face the Promise?
Face the Promise. Yep.
Okay, so that's 11 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, if you think about those 11 years, Tom Petty had Wildflowers, Echo. He did The Last DJ, Mojo. Like Mojo's probably later. That might have been past 2006.
Well, you're talking about some of his stuff. Some of that is arguably among Tom's best stuff, and I like It's a Mystery and Face the Promise, but that's not among Bob's best stuff.
Right. And that whole time that he was gone, I think that'd be the only thing that would make me say, and it doesn't make him less of a songwriter.
Right.
It's just the catalogs kept coming. Using Bruce as an example, you had The Rising that came out in that stretch. You had Magic that came out in that stretch. I think The Ghost of Tom Joad was earlier. So that was so, but again, I was shocked that Bob wasn't putting out albums during that 11-year stretch. And I think that's the only thing that could even make an argument why I would keep a Tom Petty or a Bruce Springsteen higher, is because their output just stayed kind of continuous.
Yep. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, he did take his foot off the gas a little bit, and understandably so. I mean, my understanding is that he was made it a priority to raise his family and wanted a little less of show business. So who can
no argument there. I know Garth Brooks did the same thing, and there's even Rick Moranis, who just left, like he completely abandoned his acting career I have so much respect for that.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just saying, from a musical perspective, that's the only reason why I would even chart him down one step below. It's not because of the fact that he can do it. It's the fact that there's just not as much.
No, I totally agree. Have you ever had a chance to see him in concert?
No. And it's one that I don't know if the last time he came through, I wanted to so badly, and the tickets were so obscene. I just couldn't bring same thing with Fleetwood Mac. I want to see them so bad, but raising a family myself, I can't afford $300 and $400 for one concert ticket for 2 hours. I as much as I wanted to. Tom Petty, the last couple times I saw him, $100.
Yeah.
Very reasonably priced.
Yeah, I saw him a couple of times, but I remember when I first started going to concerts, he was high on my list of an artist I wanted to see, but I had to wait a number of years because it wasn't just albums that he had a long break from. He wasn't really touring at all in the 2000s. I mean, he had one tour for that one album, and then he didn't get back out on the road until I think 2013. So I saw him a couple of times in Chicago, and I live in Milwaukee, and I finally got a chance to see him on the farewell tour in my hometown, and it was still good. It was amazing to me because, he's up there in age, but like his vocals were still very strong. And I don't think he had to retire. He wasn't retiring because his vocals were gone. Like some other artists that I won't name that should retire because their vocals are gone.
There are some bands. I'll just say this: there are some bands that I've never seen that I love their music, and I look on YouTube and I see what they're charging. And I said to my daughter, I'm like, you've never heard a song by this band, and I think you could do a better job. And I won't say who, but I'm sure that there's some keen-eyed music fans out there that probably know where I'm heading with this statement, but
Well, I think we just lost Vince Neil as a subscriber, but what are you gonna do? Okay, last question for you. I got an interesting answer from Gary Graff, who I also asked this question to, but I'm curious about your reaction because I know you saw these ads. Did Chevy ruin Like a Rock?
oh, I love the song. I used to hit skip all the time on the greatest hits CD because I've seen the commercial so many times. I mean, I think Chevy's Like a Rock commercials might have been just as egregious as the Burger King BK Have It Your Way You Rule commercials that they play during every quarter of every football game.
Yeah.
I won't go to Burger King anymore because I've heard that song so many times. I'll just starve because I'm afraid I'm going to walk in. It's going to be like Whopper, 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 Whopper. And I'm going to just, no.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. So yeah, that one, Chevy kind of really, this is going to be terrible, rammed it down your throat, but they really use that so much. I think that song to me is more overkill than Old Time Rock and Roll.
There we go.
Because of the Chevy spots.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that song was probably the first Bob Seger song I ever heard because that commercial campaign was in full force when I was a kid. So I would have saw those commercials. I just didn't know it was Bob. And yeah, my hot take on that is no, Chevy didn't ruin Like a Rock. I don't think Like a Rock's a very good song, so it can't be ruined. I know it has its fans and it's actually pretty well beloved. I understand that, but every time I saw Bob in concert, I looked up the set list ahead of time, and that was my bathroom break every time.
And that's a good bathroom break song because a lot of people would be sticking around for it.
Absolutely.
But I will say when there's an album of Bob Seger's that I'm going to the John Fogerty Creedence Clearwater Revival cover instead of the title track, that speaks volumes of how many times I've heard the title track.
It's a good point. Yeah, no disrespect to the album. That Fortunate Son cover is killer. And I also like the song Miami on that. That was in Miami Vice, great. A favorite of mine. Tell us a little bit about what you've got going on your podcast. I saw you, as we were recording this, you just posted a Christmas episode, 80s and beyond. I was really enjoying that. What's coming up in the future, if you can give us a tease?
Sure. That actually was, I just posted that. That's actually from last year, the Christmas episode.
Oh,
I posted it this year as like a callback to, hey, it's the holidays and crap. I forgot to do a Christmas episode this year. So
here I am, doing my homework as good as always. So,
oh no, don't worry about it. There's a lot going on for a solo run podcast, as I'm sure you understand. There's a lot of work that goes into this. But I have been blessed over the last couple of weeks to get some really awesome guests to come on, some people that are bucket list interviews for me. A lot of the stuff that we have going on at the show, I've been trying to mix it up a lot more because some people will message and say, hey, I love when you dive into an album every now and then. Can you do a little bit more of that? So I'm trying to mix some of that into the fold. I could spoil a couple of things because I don't like to say that I'm having a guest on until I hit stop on the record button.
Oh, I know that
because God forbid these things fall through and it sucks, but it happens. But I can say that I have Ed Toth from the Doobie Brothers and Vertical Horizon coming on, and we're going to talk about his journey from his run through Vertical Horizon into the Doobie Brothers. I have Coco Kinnan from Winona Fighter. They're a punk band that I've been a huge fan of. I got to see them live this year as we're recording it, and they were amazing. And they got their debut album coming out. And then Eric Bass of Shinedown is going to be on the program to talk about his debut solo album. And then on top of that, we've got episodes coming up, short songs, number one hits of the 70s, feel good songs and inspirational rock songs. So a pretty busy winter coming up, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of fun different topics. I'm trying to mix it up where I'll do an album dive, a mixtape curation, an interview, because there's people that tune in for different reasons. And I'm kind of guessing. I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that feeling, and that's honestly why I wanted to have you on the show, because I know you're a music expert, you're very versatile in your references, and you have all these great. I always see you posting about covers of different songs, and they're always covers I've never even come close to hearing about. So I like your show because I absolutely steal songs from you all the time. So my playlists appreciate it.
That's awesome. And I appreciate the hat tip to the cover songs. I do this thing on the show called Cover Song Dives, where I will take one song that I like and bring up multiple different cover versions. And I try to avoid the paint by numbers, color by numbers covers, where it's a note for note rendition. And I try to find reimagined versions and left ear covers where you're like, what, this is the same song. And I've done it with a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers song, 7 versions of Refugee. And I did it with I'm going to get people angry, but a Taylor Swift song, Cruel Summer. I have 2 daughters. Of course, I'm listening to Taylor Swift. And I found 6 or 7 different covers of Cruel Summer that blew my mind. I think it was 6. And I did an episode on that. And I also have an episode coming out that I did a solo playlist, and I did 10 the year in covers for 2024, but I found 10 cover songs that came out throughout this year that I think more people should be aware of. So I put together a playlist and discussed why these cover songs were kind of impactful to me this year.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I definitely got to check that one out. And on the note about Taylor Swift, hey, listen, if you've said nice things about her, you have nothing to fear. The Swifties will defend you from any, old men shaking their fists at clouds, about Taylor. So you're safe.
And I've got 2 girls that, like I said, I've heard more Taylor Swift albums over the last several years. And there's a lot that I can respect for her as an artist.
Yeah.
And then there's some songs that I'm like, oh, it's a little bubblegum. That's not my alley, but music's subjective. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
There's some people that are sitting there listening to this episode going, Bob Seger?
Right.
And at the end of the day, you and I have just spent nearly an hour saying how much we love his music. None of us are wrong.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. You couldn't put it better. Brian, this has been an absolute joy. A lot of fun. It's been an hour. It's flown by just like that. Let's do this again sometime.
Would love to have you on the podcast. We have to do a Bob Seger episode now. I think it's only fitting.
Sign me up. I'm on board. I love that.
And awesome. If any of your listeners do want to check out what I'm doing, it's very easy. Just My Weekly Mixtape, wherever you listen to podcasts, or myweeklymixtape.com.
And on social media, that's your handle, My Weekly Mixtape?
I try to get it everywhere I can. I think so far I'm doing okay, but these social media platforms are popping up faster than I can keep up with them at this point.
Yeah. And they bring out the best in everybody.
Oh, of course. There's nothing more that I like to do than seeing best of friends arguing about politics and religion and everything else.
Yeah.
That's why on social media, all I do is talk music. That's it.
Yep. One of the few good accounts on social media. I dig it. I will post all of your links in the description below. Thank you again for coming out and hanging with me to talk about some Bob Seger. I had a lot of fun, and we'll have you back again soon.
Would love it, and I appreciate you bringing me on. This has been a blast, man. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Brian.